The Galactic Council chamber floated in the darkness of space like a jewel. Ambassador Theron stood near the tall windows and looked at the stars outside. His feathers were light blue and moved softly in the perfect air of the station. Behind him, the council members sat in their comfortable seats. They were all small, gentle creatures from peaceful worlds. Today was special. 2 new species would join the council for the first time. Theron felt excited but also a little worried. The reports about these newcomers were strange. Both species came from what the scientists called dangerous worlds. Worlds with terrible weather, hungry predators, and diseases that could kill. The council had never met anyone from such places before. The other ambassadors talked in soft voices. They wondered if it was safe to let these primitive creatures join them. But the council needed workers who could do hard jobs. Jobs that were too dangerous for civilized beings. These newcomers seemed perfect for that. The doors opened with a quiet sound. Theron turned to look. A human walked into the room. Captain Sarah Chen wore a dark blue uniform with shiny medals on her chest. She was tall and walked with confident steps. Her eyes moved quickly, looking at everything in the room. She saw the exits, the guards, and the weapons on the walls. She did this without thinking, like breathing. Theron felt uncomfortable. There was something about the way she moved. Something that reminded him of the hunters in the old stories from his world. Stories that parents told children to make them behave. The human smiled and nodded at the council members. She sat down in the chair that was prepared for her. The chair was built very strong because humans were much heavier than most council species. Everything in the station had to be changed to be safe for these strong visitors. Before Theron could speak, the second door opened. Everyone turned to look. What came through the door made several ambassadors gasp. War Leader Kresk entered the chamber. He was huge. His body was covered in thick black armor made of his own shell. 6 legs carried his massive weight. 4 arms moved with controlled power. His face had many eyes that glowed with red light. 2 long antennae moved on his head, sensing everything around him. The Krev looked like something from a nightmare. Ambassador Vex from the Gentle Collective fainted and fell from his chair. Guards rushed to help him. Other council members moved away from Kresk as he walked to his seat. The metal floor made loud sounds under his weight. Theron noticed something interesting. Captain Chen did not look afraid. Instead, she turned her head and looked at the Krev with bright, curious eyes. And Kresk looked back at her the same way. It was like 2 old friends meeting after a long time, but that was impossible. These 2 species had never met before today. Theron cleared his throat and began the welcome speech. His voice shook a little. He talked about the long history of the council, about peace and cooperation among all civilized species, about how they work together to build a better future for everyone in the galaxy. The human listened politely. The Krev sat very still, his many eyes watching everything. Theron could not tell what either of them was thinking. Their faces did not show emotion the way council faces did. Then Theron explained the rules. The newcomers would have to follow many safety laws. They could not build large military forces. They must accept observers on their worlds. They would need permission to travel in most council space. All of this was necessary, he said, because they came from dangerous worlds and might not understand civilized behavior. As he spoke, Theron saw the human and the Krev look at each other again. This time something passed between them. Some kind of understanding. It made Theron feel cold inside. Captain Chen raised her hand. She spoke in a calm, professional voice. Her words were polite and correct. But Theron could hear something else underneath. Something hard like metal. She asked about the military restrictions. Why were they not allowed to protect themselves? Theron explained that the council provided protection for all members. There was no need for weapons when you had friends. The Krev made a sound. It was like rocks grinding together. Theron realized it was laughter. War Leader Kresk spoke in a deep voice that vibrated through the floor. He asked about threats to the council. What enemies existed in this galaxy? What dangers did the council face? Theron said there were no real enemies. Some pirates, perhaps. Some small disagreements between worlds. But nothing serious. Nothing that required actual war. The galaxy was peaceful now. The council had made sure of that. The human and the Krev looked at each other again. Theron saw something in their eyes. Something that looked like pity. That made him angry. How dare these primitives feel sorry for the council? The council that had existed for thousands of years? The council that had brought peace to hundreds of worlds? The meeting continued. Theron showed them maps of council space. He explained trade routes and economic zones. He talked about cultural exchange and scientific cooperation. The whole time, he tried to show them how advanced and sophisticated the council was. But the newcomers asked strange questions. They wanted to know about emergency procedures, about backup systems, about what happened when things went wrong. Theron did not understand. Things did not go wrong in council space. Everything was planned and controlled. Everything was safe. Finally, the first meeting ended. Theron felt tired. These Deathworlders were exhausting to be around. They looked at everything like it might attack them. They asked questions that no civilized being would think of. They made him aware of how soft and vulnerable he was. As everyone left the chamber, Theron watched the human and the Krev walk out together. They did not speak, but they moved in the same way. Like soldiers. Like warriors. Like two creatures who had survived terrible things and knew they would survive more. Theron shivered, even though the temperature was perfect. For the first time in his life, he wondered if the council was really as safe as everyone believed. For the first time, he wondered what might be hiding in the darkness between the stars. And for the first time, he was glad that humans and Krev existed, even if they frightened him. Maybe especially because they frightened him. The second formal meeting was scheduled for 3 days later. The council wanted to explain all the rules and requirements that humans and Krev must follow. Ambassador Theron prepared a long list of safety protocols. The chamber was checked 3 times to make sure everything was perfect. Captain Chen arrived first. She wore the same clean uniform. Her hair was pulled back tight. She looked professional and calm. But Theron noticed she carried a small device on her belt. When he asked about it, she said it was a communicator. Just in case of emergencies. Theron felt uncomfortable. What kind of emergency could happen in the safest station in the galaxy? War Leader Kresk arrived exactly on time. His massive form filled the doorway. Today he wore what looked like formal armor. It had decorations and symbols carved into the black shell. Theron learned these symbols told stories of battles the Krev had won. So many battles, too many to count. The meeting began with strict protocols. Council members explained that the gravity in the chamber was kept very low. Only 0.3 of standard. This was comfortable for most species. They explained that the air was filtered 20 times per hour. The temperature was kept at exactly 22 degrees. Everything was controlled and safe. Captain Chen nodded politely. She mentioned that Earth had many different gravity levels depending on location. Humans lived everywhere from high mountains to deep underwater stations. They were used to change. The Krev added that his homeworld had twice the gravity of the station. His people exercised in 3 times standard gravity just to stay fit. The council members looked at each other nervously. How could anyone survive in such terrible conditions? Theron quickly moved to the next topic. He explained the air composition rules. No toxins allowed. No extreme temperatures. No sudden pressure changes. Then something happened. A young council worker dropped a data tablet near the back of the room. It hit the floor with a loud crash. The sound was not really that loud, but in the quiet chamber it seemed huge. Several ambassadors jumped in fear. 2 of them activated their emergency signals. Guards rushed into the room with their non-lethal stunning weapons ready. Theron stood up quickly. His heart beat fast. The protocol for unexpected loud noises required everyone to evacuate to the safe room. It was the law. You could never be too careful. What if the noise was the start of an attack? What if something was breaking? What if the air system failed? The council members began moving toward the exit. They walked quickly but tried not to panic. Panic was not civilized. But Theron saw fear in their eyes. He felt it too. His feathers stood up. His breathing became fast. Then he noticed that Captain Chen had not moved. She sat in her chair and looked at the broken tablet on the floor. She looked back at the evacuating council members. One of her eyebrows went up. It was a small movement, but Theron understood it. She thought they were being silly. War Leader Kresk also stayed in his seat. His many eyes watched the council members leave. His antennae moved slightly. Then he made that grinding sound again. That laugh. He said something in his own language. It sounded like rocks falling down a mountain. Captain Chen smiled. Just a small smile. She said something back to him in a language Theron did not know. Kresk responded. They were having a conversation. The human and the Krev were talking to each other while the entire council evacuated in terror from a dropped tablet. Theron stopped at the door. He should leave. The protocol said so, but he was the host. He was responsible. He had to make sure the guests were safe. Even if they were terrifying guests who did not seem to understand danger, he called to them. He said they must come to the safe room. It was the law. Chen looked at him with those sharp eyes. She asked what the danger was. Theron explained there had been a loud noise. Protocol required evacuation until the source could be identified and secured. Chen stood up. She walked over to the broken tablet. She picked it up. She showed it to Theron. She said the young worker had dropped it. That was all. Just an accident. No danger, no threat. Just gravity doing what gravity does. Kresk added that if this was dangerous, his people would never survive a single day. Things fell all the time on his world. The ground shook. Volcanoes erupted. Storms threw rocks through the air. Life was loud. Theron felt his face become hot. They were right. He knew they were right. But the protocols existed for a reason. The council had lived in peace for so long because they were careful. Because they avoided all risks. Because they made everything safe. The security team checked the room. They confirmed it was just a dropped tablet. Nothing else. The council members slowly came back. Many of them looked embarrassed. They had panicked over nothing. In front of the newcomers. In front of these primitives from dangerous worlds. When everyone sat down again, there was an awkward silence. Captain Chen broke it. She said she understood the council valued safety. That was good, smart. But she wondered if maybe they had become too careful. If maybe they had forgotten that some amount of risk was normal in life. One of the council members said that humans could not understand. They came from a death world, a place where everything tried to kill them. Of course, they thought risk was normal. They did not know any better. Kresk spoke then. His voice was not angry, but it was firm. He said the council member was right. Humans and Krev came from terrible worlds, worlds that taught hard lessons, lessons about survival, about adaptation, about growing stronger through challenge. Maybe the council could learn from those lessons. Maybe being too safe was its own kind of danger. The meeting ended early. Theron said they would continue tomorrow. Everyone needed time to think, time to adjust. But as the council members left, they whispered to each other. They were scared, not just of the humans and Krev, but of what those species represented. A reminder that the galaxy was not always kind. That safety was not guaranteed. That bad things could happen even to good people. Theron watched Chen and Kresk leave together. They walked side by side down the corridor. They were talking. Not in any language Theron knew. Chen spoke something that sounded harsh and rhythmic. Kresk responded in clicking sounds. Somehow they understood each other. Later, Theron checked the security recordings. He saw where the two Deathworlders went. They found a cargo bay that was not being used. They sat there together. The human drank something dark and hot from a container. The Krev ate something that looked like it was still moving. They talked for hours. Theron could not hear what they said. But he saw them laugh. He saw them compare things. Chen showed Kresk pictures on her tablet. Pictures of Earth, mountains and oceans and storms. Kresk showed her pictures of his world. Red skies and acid rain and creatures with too many teeth. They were bonding. Two apex predators from opposite sides of the galaxy. Finding common ground. Finding friendship. Theron should have been happy. This was what the council wanted. Peace between species. Understanding and cooperation. But Theron was not happy. He was afraid. Because he realized something important. The council had invited these species to do hard jobs. To be workers and laborers. To handle the dangerous tasks that civilized beings could not. But what if the humans and Krev decided they did not want to be workers? What if they wanted to be equals? Or worse, what if they decided to be in charge? The council had no military, no weapons, no way to fight. They had never needed those things before. Theron turned off the screen. He tried to sleep but could not. He kept seeing those two figures in the cargo bay. Kept hearing that grinding laugh. Kept wondering what they were planning. If they were planning anything at all. Or if that was just his fear talking, making him see threats that did not exist. Making him paranoid like some kind of primitive creature from a death world. Over the next few weeks, the diplomatic sessions continued. Each time the pattern was the same. The council would try to explain their rules. The humans and Krev would ask uncomfortable questions. Something small would happen. The council would panic. The Deathworlders would handle it calmly. During the 5th session, the environmental controls had a small malfunction. The temperature dropped by 3 degrees. Within seconds, half the council members were calling for medical assistance. They felt cold. They might get sick. This was unacceptable. The meeting must be cancelled immediately. Captain Chen took off her jacket and offered it to Ambassador Theron. She said 3 degrees was nothing. On Earth, temperatures could change by 20 degrees in a single day. Humans wore different clothes for different weather. They adapted. It was normal. War leader Kresk said his homeworld had temperature swings of 50 degrees between day and night. His people barely noticed. Theron looked at the jacket Chen was offering. It was thick and warm. Humans needed such protection, but Chen had been wearing it in temperature they found too hot. She wore it even though she did not need it, just in case. Always prepared. The council began to notice other things too. Chen always sat where she could see all the doors. Kresk always positioned himself near the strongest wall. Both of them kept their communicators charged and ready. Both of them knew where the emergency equipment was stored. They memorized evacuation routes without being told. They counted guards and noted weapons even though those weapons were non-lethal and mostly decorative, but they were not hostile. They were polite, even friendly. Chen told jokes that made some council members laugh. Kresk shared stories about his people's history, stories about honor and loyalty, about protecting the weak, about sacrificing for others. The council had never heard such stories. They seemed strange. Why would anyone sacrifice themselves? Why not just avoid danger in the first place? The friendship between Chen and Kresk grew stronger. They met every day now, sometimes in the cargo bay, sometimes in the dining area where they ate their strange foods. Once Theron gathered his courage and joined them. He wanted to understand these creatures better, wanted to know what they talked about. Chen was drinking her dark, hot beverage. She called it coffee. She offered some to Theron. He took a small taste. It was bitter and strong. It made his heart beat faster. He asked why humans drank such things. Chen laughed. She said it helped them wake up, helped them stay alert. On Earth, you needed to be alert to survive. Kresk was eating something from his world. It looked like small, hard crystals. He said they were combat rations, food designed to give energy and strength during long battles. Theron asked how often Krev went to battle. Kresk said not as often now. They had peace on their world. But they still trained, still prepared, because peace was not permanent. Peace was something you had to protect. Theron asked what they thought of the council. Chen looked at Kresk. Kresk looked at Chen. Then Chen spoke carefully. She said the council was impressive. So many species living together peacefully, such advanced technology, such comfortable lives. It was like a dream. But then Kresk added that dreams could be dangerous. Dreams made you forget to watch for threats, made you soft, made you weak. The council had built a beautiful garden. But gardens needed walls. Gardens needed guards. Otherwise, the wild things would come in and destroy everything. Theron felt cold again. He asked if they saw themselves as the wild things. Chen shook her head quickly. She said no. They wanted to protect the garden. They wanted to be the walls, the guards. That was what they were offering. But the council had to let them. Had to trust them. Had to treat them as equals, not as servants or threats. Then the emergency happened. Real emergency this time. The station's main reactor had a power fluctuation. Not dangerous yet, but it could become dangerous. The problem was in the reactor core. Someone needed to go inside and fix the coolant regulator. But the core area had high radiation, high heat, and parts of the structure were unstable. No council species could survive those conditions. Their protective suits were not strong enough. Their bodies were too fragile. The engineers said it would take weeks to build proper remote tools. Weeks of running on backup power. Weeks of risk that the problem could get worse. Captain Chen stood up in the emergency meeting. She said humans could do it. Humans had worked in radiation before. Humans had training for exactly this kind of problem. She had 3 engineers on her ship who were qualified. They could fix it in a few hours. War leader Kresk stood as well. He said his people would help. Krev were naturally resistant to radiation. Their armor could handle the heat. They were strong enough to move debris and hold unstable structures. Together, humans and Krev could save the station. The council debated. Some members said it was too dangerous. What if the Deathworlders got hurt? The council would be responsible. Others said the station was more important. They had no choice. They had to accept help even from primitives. Ambassador Theron made the decision. He gave permission. Chen and Kresk nodded. They did not waste time with more talking. And they moved immediately. Chen called her ship and ordered her engineers to prepare. Kresk contacted his vessel and commanded his warriors to gear up. Within 30 minutes, both teams were ready. The council watched on screens as the Deathworlders entered the reactor core. The radiation levels made the video fuzzy. The heat made the air shimmer. The structure groaned and shifted. Theron felt sick watching it. How could any living thing survive in there? But the humans and Krev worked together like they had trained together for years. The human engineers found the problem quickly. They explained what needed to be done. The Krev warriors held up the damaged section so the humans could work safely. When a piece of metal fell, a Krev caught it. When radiation spiked, humans adjusted their positions to shield each other. They talked to each other constantly. Not just technical information. They encouraged each other, made jokes even in danger. A human engineer said something that made a Krev warrior laugh, that grinding laugh. A Krev called out a warning and a human responded with thanks. They worked as one team, one unit, like they were family. 3 hours later, they emerged. The reactor was fixed, stable, safe. The engineers looked tired. Their faces were red from heat. But they were smiling. The Krev warriors had scorch marks on their armor, but they stood proud, job done. Station saved. The council erupted in cheers. They were alive. The station was safe. The Deathworlders had saved them. Medical teams rushed to check on the humans and Krev. The doctors were amazed. Some radiation exposure, yes. Some minor burns. Some exhaustion. But nothing serious. Nothing that would not heal quickly. These beings were incredibly tough. That night there was a celebration. The council threw a formal dinner to honor the rescuers. Chen and Kresk sat together at the main table. Other humans and Krev joined them. The two groups mixed naturally now. They had shared danger together. Shared victory. That created bonds stronger than words. Theron gave a speech. He thanked the brave heroes who risked their lives. He said the council was honored to have such strong friends. He talked about cooperation and mutual respect. All the right words, all the proper diplomatic phrases. But inside, Theron felt something changing. He looked at Chen and Kresk differently now. Not as threats. Not as primitives. As protectors. As the strong ones who stepped forward when others could not. As the ones who laughed at danger and did the job anyway. The council needed them. Really needed them. And that changed everything. Later, Theron found Chen and Kresk on one of the observation decks. They stood looking at the stars. Theron approached carefully. He thanked them again. Chen smiled and said it was no problem. This was what they did. What their people had always done. They survived. They protected others. They made sure everyone got home safe. Kresk added that the council had given them a gift today. A gift of trust. By letting them help, the council showed they could see past appearances. Could see past fear. That meant something to him. To his people. They would remember this. Theron asked what they wanted. Chen and Kresk looked at each other again. That look that said so much without words. Then Chen said they wanted what everyone wanted. To be respected. To have a voice. To be treated as equals. To use their strength to help, not to be feared or limited or controlled. And in return they would protect the council. Guard this beautiful, peaceful garden. Make sure nothing destroyed it. Because the galaxy was not as safe as the council believed. There were threats out there. Dangers the council did not see. But humans and Krev saw them, and they would stand between those dangers and the innocent. Theron looked out at the stars. So many stars. So much darkness between them. For the first time he wondered what else was out there. What other species existed? What other dangers lurked in the deep space? The council had been alone at the top for so long. Unchallenged, unafraid. But maybe that was about to change. Maybe the galaxy was bigger and more dangerous than they had known. And maybe, just maybe, humans and Krev were exactly what the council needed. Not servants. Not workers. But guardians, warriors, friends. The rescue changed things, but not the way Chen and Kresk had hoped. The council was grateful, yes. But gratitude quickly turned to fear. The Deathworlders had proven they were dangerous.
capable of incredible things.
What if they turned that capability against the Council? Within a week, new proposals appeared. Stricter monitoring, more limitations, mandatory tracking devices for all humans and Krev, restrictions on how many could gather together, rules about what weapons they could carry, not just military weapons, but tools, anything that could be dangerous in the wrong hands. Ambassador Theron did not support these proposals. He argued against them in the private council meetings, but he was only one voice. Most council members were afraid. They had seen what the Deathworlders could do, seen how easily they handled situations that would kill any civilized being. That power frightened them. Captain Chen was angry when she heard about the new restrictions. Theron saw it in her eyes, even though she kept her voice calm and professional. She said the proposals were not acceptable. They were insulting. Humans had just saved the station. They had risked their lives to protect the Council. And this was their reward? To be treated like criminals? War leader Kresk was more direct. He said the Council was acting like cowards, hiding behind rules because they were afraid to face reality. Krev did not respect cowardice. Krev valued strength and honor. If the Council could not show those qualities, perhaps Krev should reconsider this alliance. The situation was getting worse. Theron needed to do something. He talked to Chen and Kresk privately. He apologized for the Council's behavior. He explained that they were simply scared. They had never met anyone like humans and Krev before. They did not know how to handle such powerful allies. Chen said fear was understandable. But fear should not drive policy. Fear led to bad decisions, to treating friends like enemies. There had to be a better way. That was when Kresk had an idea. He said the Council needed proof. Proof that humans and Krev could be trusted. Proof that their strength was valuable, not dangerous. What if they demonstrated their abilities, showed what they could really do? Chen understood immediately. She suggested a military exercise. The Council had defense simulations, did they not? Computer programs that tested security forces against various threats? What if humans and Krev participated in one of those simulations? Theron thought about it. The Council did have such simulations. They ran them once a year to test their security systems. The scenarios were based on the worst threats the Council could imagine. Pirate raids, terrorist attacks, system failures. The simulations were very difficult. Council security forces usually took many hours to complete them, if they completed them at all. If humans and Krev could do well in the simulation, it might ease the Council's fears. Might show that Deathworlders could be controlled allies, could follow orders, could work within rules and structure. Theron brought the idea to the Council. The debate was intense. Some Council members said it was too risky. What if the Deathworlders learned too much about Council defenses? What if they used that knowledge against the Council later? Others said it was a perfect test. If humans and Krev failed the simulation, it would prove they were not as dangerous as everyone feared. If they succeeded, it would show they could follow Council rules and work as proper security forces. The Council voted. The decision was close, but they agreed. Humans and Krev would participate in the annual defense simulation, the hardest scenario, the one based on the Council's historical worst nightmare, a full-scale invasion attempt on Unity Prime Station by a large organized force. Council security forces had never completed this scenario successfully. The best they had ever done was minimize casualties before being overwhelmed. The scenario was considered nearly impossible. It would take perfect coordination, brilliant strategy, and incredible luck to win. Chen and Kresk were given 2 weeks to prepare. They could use their own people. Human soldiers and Krev warriors. They could plan together and train together. But they had to follow the simulation rules. No real weapons. No actual damage to the station. Everything monitored and recorded. Theron watched them prepare. They worked intensely. Hours every day. They studied the station layout. Memorized every corridor and junction. They reviewed Council defense protocols. Learned how Council forces thought and moved. They drilled their combined forces until everyone knew their roles perfectly. But what surprised Theron was how they trained. Council forces trained in comfortable rooms with nice equipment. They practiced procedures step by step, everything slow and careful and safe. Humans and Krev trained differently. They ran, they shouted. They pushed themselves until they were exhausted, then kept going. They practiced in darkness and noise. In chaos, Chen explained when Theron asked. She said training had to be harder than the real thing. If you trained in comfort, you would fail in danger. You had to prepare for the worst. Had to make your body and mind strong enough to handle anything. That was how Earth taught its warriors. That was how they survived. The day of the simulation arrived. The entire council gathered to watch. They sat in a secure viewing area, with many screens showing different parts of the station. The simulation would begin with simulated enemies appearing at multiple entry points. Council security forces would respond. Everyone would see how the Deathworlders performed under pressure. The simulation began. Red lights appeared on the screens showing enemy positions. There were many of them, more than Theron expected. The computer was not being gentle. It was throwing everything at the defenders. Council security forces would have spent precious minutes analyzing the situation. Calling meetings, planning responses, being careful and methodical. That was the proper way. Chen and Kresk did not do that. The moment the simulation started, they moved. Orders went out instantly. Human and Krev teams deployed to key positions, not where the enemies were, but where the enemies would be. They were predicting. Moving ahead of the threat, the simulated enemies advanced. They expected to meet defenders at the obvious choke points, but the defenders were not there. Instead, they hit the enemy forces from unexpected angles, from above and below, from hiding spots that should not exist. The Deathworlders had found every maintenance tunnel, every service duct, every unofficial path through the station. The council members gasped as they watched. This was not how defense worked. You were supposed to fall back to prepared positions, build strong points, make the enemy come to you. That was civilized warfare. But humans and Krev were not being civilized. They were being aggressive. They attacked. They moved fast. They did not worry about acceptable losses because they were not planning to lose anyone. Every team supported every other team. When one group engaged the enemy, 2 more groups would flank them. The simulated enemies were surrounded and eliminated before they knew what happened. Kresk warriors used their strength in ways the simulation had never expected. They ripped doors off hinges to create barriers. They moved huge equipment to block passages. They even used parts of the station as weapons, turning the environment into an ally. Human soldiers showed different skills. They were fast and flexible. They climbed walls that the simulation thought were unclimbable. They squeezed through spaces that should be too small. They communicated with hand signals and subtle movements, coordinating perfectly even when their radios were jammed by the simulation. And the 2 species worked together seamlessly. Krev would break through a barrier. Humans would rush through. Humans would scout ahead. Krev would secure the position. They anticipated each other's moves, covered each other's weaknesses, multiplied each other's strengths. The simulation escalated. The computer added more enemies, more threats. It threw in equipment failures and casualties. It tried everything to overwhelm the defenders. Chen and Kresk adapted. They changed tactics on the fly. When the simulation cut power to a section, they fought in darkness. When it flooded a corridor, they used it as a trap. When it simulated heavy casualties, they reorganized instantly and kept fighting. The council members watched in stunned silence. They had never seen anything like this. This was not defense. This was dominance. The Deathworlders were not just stopping the invasion. They were destroying it, totally and completely. 2 hours into the simulation, it was over. The computer declared the invasion defeated. All simulated enemies eliminated or captured. Station secured. Mission accomplished. The time was a record. The casualty rate was the lowest ever recorded. The efficiency was beyond anything the council had seen. The viewing room was silent. Nobody spoke. They just stared at the screens showing the final statistics, showing how completely the Deathworlders had won, showing what real warriors looked like when they stopped being polite and started being efficient. Finally, one council member spoke. Their voice shook. They said this changed everything. The council had been thinking about the problem all wrong. They had been trying to limit the Deathworlders, control them, make them safe, but you could not make apex predators safe. You could not tame them or weaken them or control them. All you could do was make them your friends, make them your allies, and hope they chose to protect you instead of hunt you. Theron looked at the other council members. He saw fear in their eyes, but he also saw something else, recognition. The emergency council session was called for the next day. Every ambassador had to attend. Every species needed to vote. The question was simple but terrifying. What should the council do about the Deathworlders? Ambassador Theron arrived early. He wanted to prepare his speech. He knew what he had to say, but saying it would not be easy. He would be asking the council to do something it had never done before, something that went against every instinct of civilized beings. The other ambassadors arrived. They looked worried. Some looked angry. A few looked terrified. They had all watched the simulation. They had all seen what humans and Krev could do. Now they had to decide what that meant. The session began. The first speaker was Ambassador Vex, the one who had fainted when he first saw Kresk. His voice was high and frightened. He said the council should deny membership to both species, send them away, give them some trade agreements, perhaps some technology. But do not let them stay. Do not give them power in council space. Other voices agreed. They said the Deathworlders were too dangerous, too unpredictable. Yes, they had saved the station. Yes, they had won the simulation. But that just proved how threatening they were. What if they decided to conquer the council instead of protect it? What defense could civilized species mount against such warriors? Then another group spoke. These ambassadors had a different view. They said the council should accept the humans and Krev, but under strict control. Give them membership but limited rights. Use them as security forces, as workers for dangerous jobs. Keep them on short leashes. Watch them constantly. Never let them gain real power. A few voices suggested something else. Maybe the council should try to learn from the Deathworlders. Maybe civilized species had become too soft, too dependent on peace. What if the council trained its own warriors, became stronger? Then they would not need to fear anyone. The debate went on for hours. Theron listened to all of it. He heard the fear, the anger, the confusion. The council had never faced this situation before. They had always been the strong ones, the advanced ones, the ones in control. Now they had met species that were stronger in ways that mattered, in ways that counted when danger came. Finally, it was Theron's turn to speak. He stood up. His feathers were smooth and calm, even though his heart beat fast. He looked at all the ambassadors, all the frightened, comfortable, civilized beings who had never known real danger, who had never fought for their lives, who had never had to be strong because they had always been safe. He began by telling the truth. The truth that everyone knew but nobody wanted to say out loud. The council was weak, not in technology, not in wealth, not in knowledge, but in the strength that mattered when everything else failed, the strength to fight, to protect, to stand between danger and the innocent. That strength the council did not have. He said the council had been lucky for a long time, lucky that no real threats had appeared, lucky that pirates were small and disorganized, lucky that other species in the galaxy were either friendly or too far away to matter. But luck did not last forever. Then Theron told them something he had been hiding, something he had learned from old records deep in the council archives, something that the current generation of ambassadors did not know, because it had been forgotten, or maybe because it had been deliberately hidden. 500 years ago, the council had been attacked. A hostile species from beyond their borders had tried to invade. The council had barely survived. They had won only because the attackers made mistakes, got overconfident. The council had not defeated them through strength. They had survived through luck. After that war, the council had decided to forget it, to pretend it never happened, to tell themselves they were safe. That peace was permanent, that they would never be threatened again. They had lived in that comfortable lie for 5 centuries, but the hostile species was still out there. Theron had found references to them in the old files. They were called the Ravagers. They lived far away on the other side of unexplored space. But space was not as big as it used to be. Technology improved. Ships went faster, explored farther. Eventually, someone would find the Ravagers again, or the Ravagers would find them. The council chamber was completely silent. Every ambassador stared at Theron. They had not known. The history had been hidden too well. Now they knew, and the knowledge terrified them. Theron continued. He said the council had a choice now, a real choice. They could send the Deathworlders away and hope the Ravagers never came back. They could try to control the Deathworlders and hope that was enough. Or they could do something brave, something that went against every comfortable instinct. They could accept humans and Krev as true equals, as partners. As protectors, he said the council should offer a new treaty. Full membership for humans and Krev. Complete rights and privileges. No restrictions beyond what applied to every other species. And in return, humans and Krev would become the Council's defenders. They would train security forces, build defenses, stand ready to protect Council space from any threat, not as servants, not as workers. As honored guardians, Ambassador Vex stood up. He asked the obvious question. What if the Deathworlders betrayed them? What if they used their position to take over? What guarantee did the Council have? Theron smiled sadly. He said there was no guarantee. That was the point. The Council had to choose to trust, had to take a risk. Because the alternative was worse. The alternative was to stay weak and hope danger never came. That was not a plan. That was just waiting to die, but then Theron said something else. He said he had gotten to know Captain Chen and War Leader Kresk, had talked to them, watched them, seen how they treated their own people. Both species valued loyalty, honor, protecting the weak. Those were not just words to them. Those were principles they lived by, principles worth dying for. If the Council showed trust, humans and Krev would return it. If the Council treated them with respect, they would defend the Council with their lives. That was the nature of Deathworlders. They were dangerous, yes, but they were also loyal. And loyalty was something the Council desperately needed. The vote was called. Every ambassador had to choose. Send the Deathworlders away, try to control them, or trust them. It was the hardest decision the Council had faced in centuries. The results came in slowly. Some voted to reject, some voted to restrict, but most voted to trust, not because they were not afraid. They were terrified, but because Theron was right. The galaxy was dangerous. Pretending otherwise would not change that. The Council needed strength, needed warriors, needed someone who would stand and fight when comfortable civilization could not. The treaty was approved. Humans and Krev would have full membership, full rights, and in return they would protect the Council, train its forces, build its defenses, stand ready to face whatever threats emerged from the darkness between stars. Captain Chen and War Leader Kresk were called to the chamber. Theron told them the decision. Both of them were quiet for a moment. Then Chen smiled. A real smile, warm and genuine. She said the Council had made the right choice. Humans would be honored to protect such a civilization, to make sure peace continued. To stand guard over the garden, Kresk bowed his massive head, a gesture of respect from his culture. He said Krev understood duty, understood honor. The Council had shown wisdom today, shown courage. His people would remember this, would stand with the Council against any enemy, would shed their blood to protect those who could not protect themselves. The formal ceremony happened the next day. It was supposed to be grand and impressive, but the real moment came afterward. In a quiet room away from all the cameras and crowds, Chen and Kresk sat together. They shared a drink, human coffee and Krev combat rations. Theron joined them. He had earned that right, he thought. He had fought for them when others wanted them gone. Chen poured him some coffee, warned him it was strong. Theron tried it again. Still bitter, still made his heart race, but maybe that was appropriate. Life was not supposed to be comfortable all the time. Sometimes you needed something strong to wake you up. They talked about the future, about training programs, defense systems, protocols for emergencies, but also about simpler things. Chen talked about Earth's oceans. Kresk talked about the red deserts of his homeworld. Theron talked about the crystal forests where his people built their cities. They were so different, from worlds that were nothing alike, with bodies and minds shaped by completely different environments. But they were talking, understanding each other, finding common ground. That was what the Council was supposed to be about. Different species working together, making each other stronger. Chen raised her cup. She made a toast, to new friends, to strange alliances, to protecting what matters. Kresk clicked his mandibles together, his version of agreement. Theron lifted his own cup and drank. Later, after Theron had left, Chen and Kresk sat in comfortable silence. Finally, Kresk spoke. He asked Chen what she really thought. Whether humans and Council species could truly work together, whether this would last, Chen thought about it. She said she did not know. The Council was so different from anything humans had experienced. So soft and fragile and scared of everything. But they were also smart, kind. They had built something beautiful and peaceful, something worth protecting.